Now, when people think of the birth of Christ, they have this image in their mind, and we're going to show you that image on the screen right now. And of course, this is the image that most people portray in their minds. 3 wise men with 3 gifts coming to the manger, to the Lord Jesus, and the stars above the manger there, and there's Joseph and Mary. And people believe that this is what happened during the time when Christ was born. Now, it's almost like a cartoon fantasy when you see that image. There's nobody around. There are no social and political repercussions to this. And I keep insisting that these people were real people living in a real world with real political and social situations that were going on around them, and they were subject to it, but not according to that image. It's almost like a fantasy. It's almost like a cartoon that you watch, and all the circumstances around them just don't matter, or they just don't exist. But really, what happened during the time of the birth of Christ? When the Parthian Magi came to Jerusalem, it was a very public event. The Bible plainly says in verse 3 that all of Jerusalem was troubled. The whole capital of Jerusalem, including King Herod, was troubled when they came. Because remember, there was a truce between Parthia and Rome. And here are the Parthians coming in, Parthian nobility coming in and asking about the king of the Jews. And they didn't mean Herod. So all of Jerusalem was troubled. It was a very public event. And they came with gifts to give to a king. Now, when these Parthian nobility, when these Parthians came in and they were giving gifts to a king, they didn't come with little gifts in their hands, little pieces of gold and frankincense and myrrh like you see in that image that we showed you earlier. No, they came with a caravan full of gifts and with several hundred soldiers. Now, many people think that there were 3 wise men, but the Bible doesn't say that there were 3 wise men. It just says wise men from the east. That means there could have been 2 or 150. But it was a very considerate size army that came, caravans and camels and so on. And it was, of course, a long journey. So there was probably several hundred soldiers, several hundred people that came to visit Christ, and not 3 people on camels. And it was a very public affair. But again, now this Parthian Magi, when they came, did you know that they probably came 1 year later? That they didn't come that very night? And it says here, let me just read it to you in Matthew the 2nd chapter, verse. It says, and when they, that's the Magi, were come into the house, a house. They didn't come to a manger. It says they came into a house, and they saw the young child. They didn't see a babe wrapped in swaddling clothes like you read of in the book of Luke in a manger. They came into a house and saw the young child with Mary, his mother, fell down and worshiped him, and they had opened their treasures, and they presented unto him gifts. They presented unto who gifts? Each other, right? Wrong. Absolutely wrong. They presented unto Christ gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They gave it to Christ. They didn't give it to each other. They didn't say, well, what do you got there, Harold? Well, I got some gold. Well, what do you got there, Henry? I got some frankincense. And they sang a carol or two, exchanged gifts to one another, and then left praising God and left Christ sitting there going, but what about me? It didn't happen that way. They presented unto Christ gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, because there were 3 categories of gifts, many people believe that there were 3 wise men. But of course, the Bible doesn't say there were 3, and most likely there was a few dozen of them with armed guards, soldiers, and caravans, and came to the house in Bethlehem. And of course, Herod probably sent his spies to see which kid it was that was to be king of the Jews. And then, of course, here it says they being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. Now, notice what it says here in verse 16. It says that he slew all the children that were in Bethlehem, this is King Herod, and in all the coasts thereof, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. So from 2 years old and under, he slayed all those poor children. And so Jesus must have been at least a year old when the wise men came, because they came into the house where the young child was. A story totally different from what you're used to every single year at Christmas time. Every single year at Christmas time, you get this same story over and over again. 3 wise men coming to the manger and worshiping Christ, and then leaving without anybody noticing. But when you look at the Gospel of Luke, you don't see the wise men. There's no story about a wise man in the Gospel of Luke, because the Gospel of Luke deals with the birth of Christ that night. The Gospel of Matthew deals with the wise men, and they came a year later. A lot of people think there's a contradiction, but there is no contradiction whatsoever. When you read the story in its context, you will see that the wise men came a year later. Luke deals with the birth of Christ that night. I want you to get this free booklet, Is Christmas Christian?, free of charge, off our website, britishisrael.ca.